comes out on the website every time. I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but Hi, welcome everyone to the Martini Siegel Theater Center. Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming to our opening welcome panel for Prelude 2014. My name is Allison Lyman. I'm the artistic producer here at the Siegel Center. And before we get into all of that, I would love to welcome up our executive producer, the captain of our ship, Frank Henschker. Nope. I'm not gonna welcome him up. Off to a bumpy start. I'm glad that you could all join us at 3 p.m. On a Wednesday and take time out of your busy schedules to help us kind of kick off this 3 days of insanity, which I hear is the largest Prelude ever, actually. And so we thought we would begin the festival with just a welcome instead of a kind of a referendum on a scene, and to help us kind of talk about some of our aims in the festival, what the ideas guiding it. We're lucky enough to have Geoffrey Jackson Scott, a former curator of Prelude himself, now of the Museum of the Moving Image. So we're all just going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll be off to the races for Prelude. So thank you so much for coming.
So is this our look? We wanted to create a really intimate environment, a kind of seduction. So super quickly, so my name is Geoffrey Jackson Scott, and I'm a 3-time curator and lifetime friend of the Prelude Festival. So thank you very much for joining us today. Late last week, I had the pleasure of dining with the festival curators. We had a really wide-ranging conversation, and on the train home and in the days hence, I wrote some notes. So I'll read to you first from those notes, and then we'll sort of launch in. I don't say anything embarrassing about what we did. So our conversation was wide-ranging today. We talked about the care involved in making, about the intimacy involved in the relationship between maker and the thing made, but also about the intimacy involved in that dialogue that sparks when the thing made meets an audience. We spoke of the toll this dialogue can take on both artist and audience, and about those questions that perhaps inevitably arise for both artist and audience, maker and receiver, around the honesty and the authenticity of the thing made. So over the next half hour, we'll try to dig down into some of those things and see what space we can open up at the top of this journey for the Prelude Festival. So one of the sort of like big metaphors I think that was operating throughout our conversation was about how making is a dialogue. And so we'll begin at the beginning, and I'll ask each of you to share in your own individual processes, but also thinking about the process of making this festival. Where do you start? How do you begin? What are your first words?
Hi, everybody.
My name's Sarah Rose Leonard. I think probably the best place that I could think of to start is always with what is bothering me, like what I'm thinking about obsessively and what I can't kind of get away from just as an individual. That's usually where I start making a piece, because I can't find words for it, so it needs to come out in another form. And for me, that's usually dance theater or curating an event. And that leads me to, with Prelude, I feel like a lot of what made me choose the artists that I chose and the dialogue that we kind of had collectively was thoughts about people whose voice hasn't been heard loud enough in New York, who could use the little push that Prelude gives, and also whose thoughts kind of stay in my thoughts. So people who I've seen, whose work I've seen and I kind of haven't been able to get away from. And even if I don't understand it or I don't fully know if I like it, quote unquote, that I'm thinking about it a lot. And so to me, curating is part of an ongoing form of coming into dialogue with each other. So I think, so the people who you see here today are people who I think are young and are hungry and are saying something and also don't quite know how to say it yet. And that's what's interesting to me.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
Hi, my name is Chloë Bass, and I think that I usually start from a place of incredibly profound anxiety. And I think you do too. Whether or not we want to admit it, I think that a lot of the interactions that we manifest in the world are really from a place of needing help. I need a lot of help. And so I formulate these kinds of inquiries that allow me to get that help from others without standing around and crying help. And I think that actually, if you do it right and if you do it carefully, invites a lot of participation in a way that is really honest, that is really intimate, that can endure over time, and that provides a kind of sense of care between me and the people that I'm working with, between the people that I'm working with and the audience that we present to, and sort of folding those people back into themselves so that it becomes less clear over time where the inquiry really is, and more so how we're working together in service of kind of fighting against it. So for Prelude, I was very interested in providing spaces where that can happen and in inviting some people here who I know also kind of operate from that anxious place and seeing what it is that they want to share with us that might be in service of some of our own fears and how we can prevent them. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, Chloe.
Everyone held this so well. My name is Jackie Sibblies Drury, and I guess I'm a playwright, and so I tried to write things to start things. For the most part, I guess the way that I start a play is sort of like the way a baby is born in a different, not with sex, of course, but although maybe, hi mom, she's right there. But I think that I try to have a lot of ideas and concepts and see which ones can sort of swim upstream and make it through the protective barrier that I have of anxiety and self-deprecation and boredom. So whichever ideas seem to figure out a way to make it through are ones that will germinate, hopefully, into a play. And as for curating this festival, it's the first time that anyone has asked me to choose anything besides like a waiter at a restaurant. And I found it to be incredibly daunting and incredibly difficult because there are, as an artist, there are so many artists that I've come to know and come to admire and come to respect, both professionally and personally. And so to me, to feel a little bit less like a gatekeeper, because that's something that I think we are all not excited about as like a sort of personal politics. I decided that I wanted to have a concept that I thought would be something interesting for people coming to see the festival to talk about with each other in the giant weird lobby outside. And so I allowed myself to ask people to participate in the festival based on the way that their work fit into the concept that as I was developing it. And that's
how I did that.
Thanks, Jackie.
I guess off of Jackie, I'm a dramaturg and a producer, so I usually try to begin conversation by not saying anything, but by listening, and I'm sometimes not good at it, but I always try. And so I think that coming at a conversation from the point of always, what can I do to help? How can I help you? Is something that is, I guess, I'm a little hardwired for, and so I guess that leads itself when you're listening. I guess when you're occupying kind of a different place. I'm not a writer or a director, so I occupy a different place when I'm observing or participating in theater. I guess I start to hear things that feel like conversations, like between myself and another artist, and so I think that for me, how this translated into the curation of Prelude is that I was having a lot of response to people or to seeing artwork that felt like it was made by somebody who was very pointedly trying to talk to me in some way, somebody who was absolutely trying to use the architecture of performance to begin a conversation. And that kind of became a larger conversation about, or a larger, I guess, a larger thought that I was having about whether or not a performance as a conversation is actually an honest conversation or not, and what the stakes are for each individual, and how honesty actually functions in the performer and observer relationship. And so I guess the roundabout way of saying, when you start to listen, you start to when you start from a place of listening, you often are already critiquing, for better or for worse, like what's being said to you, rather than starting from a statement. So,
thanks, Allison.
You guys can come in if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
And there's candy. It's circulating the room.
Chloë, you said a thing that struck me that I think we could sort of do something with for a while. Part of how we're talking is about the act of creation as a conversation, as a dialogue. And you were talking about it from a place of care. And there's just a little thing you said about doing it right and doing it carefully. And I'm curious, what is right and carefully? What does that look like?
I don't know the answer to what is right and what is careful, but I think that there are some symptoms of when it's not being done carefully, and maybe we can start from a place of what we'd like to avoid. I'm starting to sound a little bit like the American medical system. Like, we can't give you acupuncture, but we can give you erectile dysfunction drugs. And I think that actually is the kind of thing that we want to avoid. That's bad care, right? So that when we're making something, especially something that involves other people, what we're trying to think is not how to prevent this ultimate crisis of functioning, but more what is it that we need kind of on a daily basis in order to maintain the ability to do what we're doing. I think what we do is really hard. And I also think that talking about the fact that it's hard is really narcissistic. So if we want to get away from that kind of loopy conversation, we need to make it less hard for ourselves. So I guess one element of doing it right is saying, like, I don't need to bleed from every orifice in order to put on, well, I don't put on plays, I'm an artist, but you all put on plays, and that's really great. And I've done it in the past, and I feel like there's a mentality of, like, if I slept the least, I win. And I don't think that's really good for anybody. So one symptom of doing it right and carefully is finding ways that we don't have to do that, and that kind of competitive question becomes a non-issue. And I know that sounds more like personal behavior than like art, but I don't think those two things are so separate, really, in the long run.
What about for others of you? How do you know when it's right and when it's careful? And I think that's actually, just to sort of expand the frame a bit, you don't necessarily need to answer from a position of making. It could also be from a position of receiving. When you've been in an audience, when do you know that you've been cared for? How do you identify that?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that it is a feeling that I have felt many times, and I think it's interesting because we've organized the festival around these 4 kind of central ideas or feelings, and they all feel, the more that we talk about them, they all feel very linked, like honesty and endurance and loss and intimacy and care all feel like they are of a piece, although we are each kind of trying to wrestle with them as individual things. But I guess the way that I know when something has been done careful is that I feel included in a conversation, and that begins with, to me, that begins from the moment I walk into the theater, and sometimes it even begins the moment that I receive an invitation to the theater. So I feel like care begins long before you're actually seated.
Are you suggesting that care begins at home?
Care begins at home. Care begins at home. No, care begins, with. I think of everything as an act. I think that everything is artistic. I think producing is artistic. I think that marketing is artistic. I think all of those things are artistic, and they are all ways to invite people into a conversation. And the more that that's possible, to the extent that that's possible across all of the ways that we make shows, that's doing care right. From the audience's perspective, I guess.
I'm going to ask you in a second, actually, for each of you to talk about the themes. Well, not the themes, the goalposts that organize the festival. Before that, I felt a little sparkle in the audience when I asked about how do you know when you've been cared for as an audience. So I want to ask you, if you'll throw up your hands, anybody who's moved to respond to that. How do you know when you've been cared for? Maybe it's not.
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be. I'm just curious how you know. But I'm also curious about your response. So, is it a good thing to be cared for, or no?
I guess some people respond to that and some don't. But I know a lot of artists who really don't give much of a shit about the audience as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
It prejudices me against their work, or
Does that shift for you from artist to artist, or in general, do you feel a lack of a requirement to be cared for? Because I think I suggest in my question that it's a thing that we require to be cared for. I don't mean to, but is it something you seek or no?
I don't think of myself as a very fragile audience member. I kind of feel like I can take care of myself.
Yeah.
And, if I need to leave, I'll leave. If I need to hit back, I'll hit back. If I need to hate, I'll hate. I don't think I ask the artist to take care of me. I just ask the artist to have care with their own work.
With their work, yeah. Other responses to the same questions? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The word you started with was careful.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when it's right and when it's careful, which is different than being cared for. Because there's a careful way to be negligent. There's a careful way to abuse or ignore or whatever. And so, yeah, I agree. I think, two things. One, when you know that the artist cares deeply about what they are making, the consequence of that is almost always that it's deeply felt. And also, I agree with what Sarah said about when you can't stop thinking, when it sticks on you and you're stuck with the performance, then I think it's probably right and careful.
This is probably like the hard thing to describe, but how do you know when an artist really cares for the work in the way that you set out? How do you know? You you said it and I liked it, and I'm just curious how you know.
I guess because maybe they're not spending so much time trying to care for other people, that they're fully devoted to the thing they're doing. I don't know the answer.
Any other responses? Yeah.
You know, I really think it depends on what genre you work in, what kind of theater you do. I mean, I do all kinds of theater, but a lot of the work that I do is community-based. And my feeling is, and I don't think I would have framed something in terms of caring, although I think that's at the heart of it. I think that it's about saying that I feel cared for when I feel that there's a shared experience, that I'm not just a backdrop for somebody else's projections of what they want to say. That they're really interested in a dialogue, and the dialogue happens in the space between us. And that I can feel a kind of respect for me as an audience member, not a pandering, but a respect and a wanting to bring me in. And I feel cared for when I feel that somehow, even if a vision is a nihilistic, because the world is so difficult right now, that I still feel that compelled to some kind of action, that I have been inspired by what I've seen, to have some kind of movement within myself and movement within the ways in which I connect with other people, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And I'm just speaking, I mean, I could be speaking from any number of positions. Right now I'm speaking as an audience member. But I could be speaking as a director, or I could be speaking as a performer, I could be speaking as Jackie as a writer, you know. But I think that there's a kind of respect that care suggests a kind of respect and a kind of inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Thank you all three, actually. It's a difficult question to sort of try to tease out.
Just caring for the viewers at home.
Yeah.
Can you pass the microphone around to the audience if they're going to ask questions, because otherwise it's not going to make it onto the stream or onto the...
Sure, yeah. Thank you. That's excellent. I don't... No, I do care. I do. So let's move a little bit then into... sort of digging into the ways that you cared for, both for the work that you engaged in together, but also for us, for the other side of that dialogue. Can you talk with us a bit about those goalposts of care, of intimacy, of honesty, and of endurance that frame the festival?
In that order.
Not necessarily.
In that order.
Ask a question that piggybacks on yours and
Absolutely.
into the mic.
Sure.
Oh. Wow.
That's service.
Did you see what she did? I know that the way the curatorial teams have been put together from year to year have differed over time. And so just to frame that question a bit, can I just ask, did you find each other? Did someone put you together? If you were put together not by yourselves, are you aware of the logic by which you were put together? Because I think it has to do with the way that your four different concerns relate to one another.
Thanks, that's great.
We'll start with you. And then I'll talk about it.
Okay. Do you want to take this one? No, you're not gonna. You're never gonna talk. All right. So we all came to Prelude through various ways. I work at the Siegel Center now as a co-director of programs. Although I produced Prelude for a couple years, and Frank was Frank and I talked a lot about how to build a curatorial panel for this year and how the curatorial panel should function. And there emerged this idea that it would be interesting, instead of working with people that are that are known as curators exclusively, or that work exclusively in the producing and curatorial realm, that they're also active makers. And so from there, we kind of made a list of people that we thought were interesting, and unfortunately, everyone said yes. But yeah, I'm not. I think in trying to arrange the festival curatorial team, we were thinking about people whose concerns are different, who are approaching theater and performance from vastly different areas, or not vastly different areas, but from different disciplines. So I'm a dramaturg. Chloë is an artist and a public practitioner whose work very much could look like theater with a theater frame on it, but is not theater. Sarah Rose is a producer and a curator and a director and a literary manager, and on. She's a wonderkind. And then Jackie is a playwright, and those felt like 4 very interesting entry points to what it is to curate a festival that function in a way that's different than, I'm a curator, I assemble teams. That's what I do for a living. So I hope that answers your question.
So then to the question of the goalposts, if you will, for the festival, can you each speak about those? So we'll start with Jackie. Jackie, can you talk with us about intimacy?
Thanks, Geoffrey.
You're welcome, Jackie.
The goalposts themselves, I feel like, came out of a conversation between the 4 of us. I guess the one that I'll talk about, and the one that I was sort of the most focused on, is this question of intimacy that has like a funny title in your programs. It's All Together, All Alone. Basically, I had been living abroad for the past 6 months in a sort of remote location in northern Africa, and I wasn't able to see any theater at all because that wasn't in the town that I was living in, and I missed it. And what I missed the most was sort of the simplest idea of theater, of like live people trying to communicate things to each other in a space. And so I think that I was drawn to thinking about different ways of performing intimacy and of experiencing intimacy in a theatrical setting. I think that I also, because I'm a dorky writer, and even though I try not to do typical playwrighty things, I still really like wordplay. So I was like, intimate. There's an interesting thing here, thinking about intimating something, meaning talking about something that tends to be political and talking about it in a way that is indirect. And I thought about sort of thinking about those 2 things at the same time, if that makes any sense. And it probably doesn't, so you can probably tell me how to think about it better, hopefully over the course of the next 3 days.
And Sarah, now I've identified each of you as sort of laying claim to one of these goalposts, and maybe that's an incorrect reading of how it came together. That's appropriate, okay. In that case, can you talk with us about endurance? Yeah. Okay.
My thoughts were circling around ideas of endurance and loss, and I'm kind of a sucker for slashes, so it's endurance / loss, because I really like duality. But I guess what started me thinking about endurance was kind of when I zoomed out at all the people I was gravitating towards and thinking about. I thought a lot about how they're all people who can, kind of echoing what Chloe was talking about, like take care of each other, and people who have endured. Like basically to survive in theater and to be successful at theater, it's just really about continuing to make theater well for a very long time. And I think these are people who have continued in ways that is very honest and very simple, and really people who think about their work. And I also thought a lot about, like, is there such thing as how long is too long? You can see in the program we've kind of identified like words that are kind of, I don't know, tag words, and then questions that kind of unspool those tags. So I thought a lot about how when do we stop making work? When do we get exhausted? And what does that exhaustion look like in a piece or in a person? And I think that's very interesting. And then sometimes it's literal, like Josh is right there, is making a play about a marathon. So that's literal endurance. And then I think about the flip side of that, which is loss, and how we're constantly enduring loss, and how it doesn't really have an end. And I think we, as a society in the US, really put an end on it. And you should get over it, you should move on, you should go forward. And I think those are all just false, and that you don't. And I'm really interested in how people continue to live with loss and normalizing that in a way, and not making that kind of a weird, sad thing, but being like, that's just normal. So I think a lot about that in my own work as well.
And let's leap over Chloe. We've talked about care a little bit, but we'll come back.
My framework is honesty, and it came originally out of this idea that this feeling I was seeing a lot of work that was post-ironic, which I don't know what that means. I now realize after thinking about it a lot more, but I was interested in that idea, and but honesty is just another word that I think is a very, very problematic one, and one that artists are in a really good position to problematize, because what do we mean when we say honesty? And for whom? And whose honesty? And what is honesty? And so that same question of how do you know when you're being cared for, I ask, there's a panel that will happen tomorrow, and I sent out this kind of like poll and asking people how do they know when they see something honest on stage. And it's also a similarly like really weird question to ask, because everybody says, oh yeah, I know when I see something honest on stage, or oh, I try to make, I think about honesty in my work. But then when you start digging down a little deeper, it's clear that that definition is so vastly different for so many people. And for some people that might sound very obvious, and like I was telling Chloe, that might seem very like 9th grade philosophy course, but I actually think that it's something that people who deal with representation on stage should go back to again and again and again, and asking themselves, what is honest, and what do I mean by honest, and what do I mean in general when I'm putting something into the room.
Thank you. Chloë, can you take us back to care?
Yeah, so care is my framework, as you might have guessed, by process of elimination. And like Jackie, I'm also drawn to wordplay, although I don't have the excuse of being a playwright to explain why. And of course, the word curate and the word care are really the same word. So when I was asked to do this, and I'm really not a curator, either by training or even by accidental habit, I started to think of what it is even about that role that interested me in getting involved with this festival. And I think it just became sort of an excuse to talk about care, and particularly the places where care disappears. So if you look in your program, my catchphrases are care's hiding place, is care a form of participation? And I'm always trying to think about sort of like, what is it that puts me here and puts you over there? And I sort of wish that you weren't over there, and I sort of wish that we were all over here. And it's not because I'm like wonderfully politically horizontal or terribly enlightened, it's because I'm nervous. And I think that if you were over here too, you'd be nervous, so we could do that together. And I think that that kind of participation is really actually productive, and returning to kind of the fact that I start from a place of anxiety and hopefully don't end up in a place of anxiety. It's nice to kind of create a framework of choice making within that. And so that is the curatorial role, but that is also sort of a care that we build together.
Tell me what that means. Oh, thank you. It's like, what does that mean? Keep it rolling. So we should start wrapping up. So that, inevitably that means that who gets cut off are the people who are not in the light. So with the time remaining, are there any comments or questions that we can take? And I'll run to you with a microphone like Phil Donahue. Yeah.
So this is just such an interesting way to organize a theater festival, you know? So props for that. I've never seen a theater festival that's been organized in this particular way. Chloë, can you just talk a little bit about the anxiety?
I mean, what do you want to know?
30 seconds.
Questions are last, right? Let me make you anxious. Will you talk to us about anxiety?
Yeah.
I'll sit with you while you do it if you want.
Can I sit with you? I'm gonna come sit with you. Okay.
Come on over. You want some candy?
I do, actually. I bought all this candy. I didn't get any. So thank you. Ooh, this is a really good one. I am over here because it's nice to see you all. But now, of course, I have my back to some of you, so that sucks. I think honestly, and carefully, and intimately, and with endurance, sometimes with loss, we as New Yorkers especially, but I think as any kind of urban dwellers, and we are all increasingly going to be urban dwellers in the future, so get ready. We bump up against each other a lot in ways that we feel like we are not supposed to, and this makes us angry. And I think it reminds us of the parts of ourselves that we try to hide and don't like. And that produces a lot of necessary anxiety, but also a lot of sort of layers of performance on top of it. So that's a very general answer. If you want a more specific answer, you can ask another question.
I would love to, but I have a sense that we're out of time, and I'm trying to behave well in this space. How about if I ask in another setting?
And you're totally right. We are out of time.
We're out of time. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chloe, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming out with us to sort of open the festival and open up the questions that surround the festival. To piggyback and make a very terrible close to that conversation, as you encounter each other and bump into each other in the hallways and pathways, and as you encounter the new work, don't be afraid to connect with each other about your experience and what you see, and to question and consider the ways that these goalposts do or do not frame the experience of the work. Thank you.
Place for that. Yeah.
Yes, there's a place for that. Say more.
It's on. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm really now I'm a microphone hog, but we do have a room specifically for this. It is my performance. It is called the Resource Room. It is in the James Gallery. It is embedded in the existing exhibit, so you will have to come find me, but I will be there. And you now know what I look like. So please come.
So thank you all again very much.